7:30 invited various Coalition and Labor MPs to join the program tonight. None was available. Instead, Independent Senator Nick Xenophon sat down with me in our Sydney studio. Senator Xenophon, thank you for your time.
Pleasure.
What do you make of revelations that the Prime Minister Tony Abbott has repeatedly used his parliamentary entitlements to cover trips in which he's competed in sporting events?
Well, I've heard the Prime Minister's reasons for that he was in marginal electorates, he was also doing other campaigning, and I guess if you're in politics, you're always campaigning in some way, but this just highlights the need for reform of the rules to restore public confidence, and I think there are 4 or 5 things that we can do. The first is we shouldn't lose sight of the bigger picture, that $34.5 million was spent in the last calendar year on Polly's travel. We can actually shave millions of dollars off that by firstly insisting that politicians fly economy class on flights of 2 hours or less, requiring MPs to provide a very short 2 or 3 line statement every time they have a trip to simply say what the trip was for. That can go online, be open to scrutiny by the media and the public within a month. Thirdly, require that travel is undertaken on the best available fare that has some flexibility. I regularly fly on semi-flexible fares that I can cancel at the last minute, but it's still much cheaper, and that's why my travel bill is about half that of many of my colleagues. And also, basically, if an MP does make a mistake, the default position should be that you pay almost like double demerit points, pay back double the amount. That will focus all our minds in relation to dealing with this.
We've had, in the past few days, a number of cases come out on both sides of politics. Is this a widespread problem, or are we just getting that impression because of these isolated cases that are coming out?
Look, I like to think it is quite isolated, but it does show that there needs to be greater clarity in relation to the rules. The Belcher Review, Barbara Belcher's review of politicians' entitlements back in November 2010, the report was published then. Not much has happened in respect of that. The point was made there are something like 10 or 11 different government agencies and departments that deal with entitlements. Let's consolidate that, but let's have some clarity in the rules. And if you have that level of scrutiny and accountability, and if we do make a mistake, we've got to pay back double the amount, I reckon that will really go a long way in cleaning up the system.
Do you think that there's a practice where politicians decide, well, I'd personally like to be in such and such a place for such and such an event, and so therefore let's book that in and then I'll just hook up a few work events around that so I can claim the whole thing?
Well, look, that may happen, and that's why you need to disclose what other events you're going to. And in that case, maybe the appropriate thing to do is for only half the cost of the event, to be paid for by taxpayers. There's lots of things that we can do that can save a lot of money for taxpayers and restore faith in the system. But the fact is, if we look at the way that travel is booked, the way that fares are booked, the entitlements attached to that, we shouldn't lose sight of the bigger picture that a lot of money can be saved, and this is a timely reminder, and this is the time to actually reform this once and for all.
Beyond that though, in terms of what actually constitutes an event that you should be entitled to claim your attendance at, do you think that most or many or even any Australians would accept that participating in a sporting event or attending a colleague's wedding is work-related for a politician?
Well, I think the idea of a wedding is much more problematic. You know, some irony, I was in Tamworth today seeing Barnaby Joyce. We didn't go anywhere near any wedding chapels, and I know that it's something he's been chastised for, but the fact is the rules have been ambiguous and vague. They need to be reformed, and I think if you...
But outside the rules though, sorry to interrupt, just outside the rules, do you think that Australians would think that's legit, even if the rules allowed for it?
No, they don't think it's legit, and that's clearly the case. I just don't see the justification for it. I mean, politicians can justify it after the event, in a sense, by saying that there was a lot of networking, they're always on duty. There's the Peter Reith argument. That doesn't really hold. But if you have a system of requiring an MP to say what they're going on the trip for, and that's published online within 30 days, I think that will focus the mind of every MP, every senator, before they make a claim, and I think that itself would go a long way into cleaning this whole system up.
Just to be clear, have you yourself had to pay back any entitlements that you've wrongly claimed?
Yes, I have, and that related to having self-drive hire cars in Canberra, because I thought, silly me, that it would save money using those self-drive hire cars rather than using taxis in Canberra, which are hard to get, and it was a cheaper way of doing it. But apparently Canberra is one place where you can't use them under the quirks of the rules. So I had to pay it back, not happily, but I'm hoping that the rules can be reformed, because at the end of the day, I was trying to save taxpayers' money.
As part of a potential reform of the rules, what do you think about the Minchin protocol, whereby politicians can quietly pay back an entitlement if they're found to have wrongly claimed it or if they're just caught out?
Well, I think at the very least that protocol needs to be changed so that if there has been a wrong claim, however innocent, then you ought to pay at least double the amount. That will focus the mind. And of course, there are serious penalties that can be subject to prosecution, and that's something that that is always an option, that if you wrongly claim, if you fraudulently claim, then you can be subject to criminal sanction.
The former Speaker, Peter Slipper, says he thinks there's a double standard because he's facing court action over the alleged misuse of parliamentary entitlements in regards to cab charges, whereas other politicians have been allowed to pay back even greater sums without any obvious penalty. What's your view of that?
I'm a bit cautious to comment on that because Peter Slipper's case is before the courts, and I don't want to say anything that would prejudice that case. He does have an absolute presumption of innocence in relation to that. But he does make a point that there do appear to be inconsistencies in the system, and this is the opportunity to restore public faith in the system and also to save millions of dollars of taxpayers' funds in the process.
Do you think that the AFP should investigate anything we've heard about in recent days?
Well, that's for them. I think the standard is much higher, but I think we actually need to review this in a way that's independent and robust and actually includes public participation, that we have some independent observers in any process. It's too much of a closed shop at the moment, but I think we can get this right, and that's why I'll be writing to the new Special Minister of State, Senator Michael Ronaldson, who I do have a very high regard for. He's got an opportunity here to bring about some reforms that will restore public confidence in the system.
Senator Xenophon, thank you very much.
Thanks, Lee.